It gives me great pleasure to introduce Sue Walker, who's a very dear friend and colleague. She's the Sheila Hanbury Chair of Maternal Fetal Medicine and Head of Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology and Newborn Health at the University of Melbourne. She's also a co-director of Mercy Perinatal. Her interests are wide-ranging, including improving the detection and movement of fetal growth disorders, treatment for preeclampsia and prevention of stillbirth. But there's a lot more to Sue than that as well. What's there is she's an incredible leader around women in science and medicine. She runs conferences about holding your ladder to support each other. She's also a supporter of men, I'll say that too. But she's really a leader at how you change the world and how we think. So I also did chase her for a year or two, I have to say. And so I'm very excited that you're going to hear from Sue today.
Great. Thank you so much for those warm words of welcome. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to get a note to myself. Never follow Mark Dawson when you're giving a talk. No, look, it's an absolute pleasure. Ingrid, thank you for the invitation, to the Academy for inviting me, and to all of you for joining on what I hope will be a really transformative day in your careers. These are the parklands near where I live in Heidelberg. I'd like to acknowledge also the traditional custodians of the lands on which I live and work and meet today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I extend my respect to elders past and present, and extend that welcome and respect to any First Nations people who are with us today. So as you've heard, mightn't be Mark's favourite person, but I am indeed an obstetrician and maternal fetal medicine subspecialist. Whenever I'm giving this talk, I always think to myself, is this guy sitting in the very back row just quietly watching? Does anyone know who this person is? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking it's the new Pope on Casual Clothes Day. No, it's not the new Pope on Casual Clothes Day. This guy is James Heckman. He's a professor of economics at Chicago University. He's a Nobel laureate. His claim to fame is quite simply this, the Heckman curve. He proposes that never mind for that child and that family, for the economy of a society, you need to invest early to get the greatest return. Whether it's in education, employability, the criminal justice system, health outcomes, life expectancy, intergenerational benefits, we need to invest early, and this, of course, is the place where I work, to make sure that every child, where possible, has the best possible 9 months as their start to life. Now, if James was sitting in the back of the row, I think he would say we need clinician-scientists on the front line. We need clinicians who work with women and their families, and midwives and obstetricians and sonologists and neonatologists, but we also need the great minds and the big hearts of research. Because as it's said, if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. So my contribution, I suppose, in trying to push that curve to the left as a maternal fetal medicine specialist and a clinician scientist is in the 4 domains: high-risk clinical care, education, research, and importantly, nurturing the people around and behind me. So connect, inspire, discover, and grow. So let's turn to my clinical work first. We all understand that when women get pregnant, they have a dream, not just of having a baby. They dream of a child who will kick a ball, read a book, get along with their friends. They dream of the adolescents who, God knows, are smarter than us, funnier than us. They dream of the adult who they will one day safely leave behind. But when a baby is born sick or small or still, those dreams are suddenly and tragically up for grabs. So I work as a maternal fetal medicine in that area. I work with women who are at risk in the pregnancy, who carry pregnancy, organ transplant, major cardiac disease. I meet with those families whose baby has a serious problem of growth, of structural or genetic development. Families who've hit the iceberg of the major obstetric syndromes, preeclampsia, fetal growth restriction, or facing preterm birth. Because I certainly think that it's true that in all of our research and with all of our knowledge, it still remains true that no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that connection that I have in a multidisciplinary team and with patients and their families is still one of the major drivers that gets me out of bed each morning. So that's clinical care. What about education? So as Ingrid mentioned, I'm proud to be a co-director of Mercy Perinatal. We have a massive educational program. We have about 12,000 subscribers. We run international and national conferences in science, in leadership, in midwifery leadership and obstetric leadership. T.S. Eliot says, where's the knowledge we've lost? Where's the wisdom we've lost in knowledge? Where's the knowledge we've lost in information? ChatGPT can't tell us everything. What we need is the researchers who know the answers and who have an ability to translate that knowledge into wisdom for clinicians and for me to make sure that the best of knowledge is in the hands of maternity care providers everywhere. But perhaps what we're hearing a lot about today is research. And one of my big research programs is identifying babies at the end of pregnancy who are tragically at risk of stillbirth, getting placental biomarkers, incorporating that with AI-assisted ultrasound so we can assess, is this placenta good to carry this baby all the way through? But the story I'm going to tell you about today is a treatment for preeclampsia, because we're going to hop up in our hovercrafts and go over to Cape Town in South Africa. And the reason I want to tell this story is because it's a story of growing the future. The discovery I'm telling you about comes from Fiona Brownfoot, who was a registrar when she did her PhD with us, made the discovery that then this person, Kathy Kluver, took to Cape Town in South Africa. Kath at that stage just came to do a year of maternal fetal medicine training with us, but she heard of the discoveries in the lab and said, I can take that to clinical trial in the place where it's needed most. She now runs a world-leading clinical trial program in treatments for preeclampsia. And I just couldn't be more proud of these two young women and where they've gotten to. But I digress. Let's go back to preeclampsia. A little recap, just in case Mark wagged this lecture at medical school. So the recap on preeclampsia is that we have a hypoxic ischemic placenta. We know that there are genetic and immunological and maternal other reasons, but for whatever reason, this hypoxia and ischemia creates a grumpy placenta that squirts these toxins out into the mum's circulation. The leading one is soluble flip, but there are many others. And these anti-angiogenic factors go out into mum's circulation where they target the biggest organ in our body, the endothelium. Those 6 tennis courts area of that fine layer of cells that lines every lymphatic and blood vessel in our body. Now, when you cause endothelial damage, it results in a fairly characteristic signature. You end up with vasoconstriction, platelet aggregation, microthrombus formation, increased capillary permeability. And so all you need to do is recapitulate that in every organ system and you end up with preeclampsia. Uncontrolled vasoconstriction and hypertension, capillary leak in the kidneys and proteinuria, reduced perfusion, reduced urine output, acute kidney injury. The transaminitis, an edematous liver, capsular stretch, risk of rupture. In the brain we have vasospasm, the risk of eclampsia, cerebral edema, intracranial hemorrhage, and a microangiopathic hemolytic anemia from the hypoxic microcirculation. Now, of course, the placenta, who is the culprit here, is also the victim. The placenta itself becomes progressively more ischemic, it squirts out more toxins, the disease continues to amplify, but it also starts to affect fetal growth, increasing the risk of abruption and fetal death. So in summary, we end up with hypertension and multi-organ damage, and this vicious cycle where we have an inexorable disease progression until such time as the placenta is taken out. It's this condition that claims the lives of 70,000 mothers and 500,000 babies every year. Moreover, for survivors, it has long-term increased risk of cardiovascular, cerebrovascular disease and early death. So what would James say? Or what James would say is, well, you need a treatment. Well, we get that, James. We know we need a treatment. So the hunt for a cure, and where do we start? At the moment, as I say, our only choice is to deliver the placenta and therefore the baby, sick, small, ready or not. But what if instead we could target these anti-angiogenic factors and either reduce the release of these from the placenta or protect the blood vessels from their toxic effects? Now, of course, the majority of this burden of disease is shouldered in low-income countries. If we want to find such a treatment, it needs to be able to be taken orally, needs to be cheap, off-patent, not need a cold chain. It needs to have a safety in pregnancy. And so it takes us to the lab and back to Fiona, who in the laboratory discovered that a drug that we use commonly and safely in pregnancy, metformin, does indeed have such characteristics. Between the third and fourth floor in the hospital, Kathy Kluver downstairs doing a clinical role with me said, I can take that back to South Africa and I can run the clinical trial on the population where it is most needed. And these are the many faces of the PI trial. Women who are waiting in hospital, hoping that they can safely get to a gestation where the baby could be scooped out and saved in an environment where neonatal resources are constrained. So what were the results? Well, we did see indeed a prolongation of gestation. If you think we stared at that p-value for quite a long time, just hoping that it would shrink a little bit, we absolutely did. But nevertheless, we did have a prolongation of gestation, a trend towards increased birth weight, a shorter neonatal length of stay, and the accompanying commentary said this may be the first study to report on an agent that can safely prolong pregnancy in preterm preeclampsia. It, of course, as you would imagine, stirred up quite a bit of interest in the medical and the broad literature. People were asking, is this ready for prime time? No. The scientists never believe their hypothesis until they're sure. The PI3 trial, the definitive trial of 500 patients, we're about 2/3 of the way through in South Africa. But we now have collaborators in Sweden doing PI4, in the Netherlands, PI5. And we've now just received $2 million from the MRC to do a prevention trial of metformin to prevent preeclampsia from happening in the first place. So if I was to look back to this person as she got her year 12 results, this person as she graduated many years ago, these poor children during the time of my specialist training or during my doctorate, or as we trailed over to Toronto to do my subspecialty training and brought them all the way home again. I guess I would say to all of those people how incredibly fortunate I feel to be both a clinician and a scientist. And if I had the opportunity, would I send a message in a bottle back to my 16-year-old self? And could some of those messages in a bottle be helpful for you today? And so I guess what I'm thinking about is that there are some monsters that are perhaps worth knowing about and taming. And these are some of mine. So as they say, fine is a 4-letter word. How are you? I'm fine. Okay, so fine. We need to recognise, as Mark alluded to before, that failure is a crucial part of the road to success. And how do we deal with failure? How do we deal with imposter syndrome? Who was the person practising her talk in the disabled bathroom? Guilty as charged. Negotiation, when do you say yes? And then how do you say no? And one of the hardest things, how do we give and receive feedback about performance and behaviour in a way that is good for the person and good for the group working with them? Okay, so let's first turn to failure. Because Ingrid's very generously given you an overview of who I am and what I do, but I listen to this blah, 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 university professor, and I think, yeah, you know what, that's not really me, or at least it's partly me. But I would like to welcome you to my I regret to inform you CV. Now, this is a massive CV, all right? What you see on the top is nothing compared to all the failures that sit behind it. I started good and early, unsatisfactory progress with the Dean in University of Melbourne, so if that's you, don't worry, it's not defining. But your investigator grant was unsuccessful. This isn't suitable for publication. Your patient was taken back to theatre overnight. All of these events were failures which taught me so much but were exquisitely painful, and we don't talk about them. And why don't we talk about failure? Well, we don't talk about it because of how it feels. It's sad, it's disappointing. Sometimes we feel guilty. We sometimes feel embarrassed, we feel ashamed. It's a very powerful feeling, and it's perhaps worth asking ourselves, why does it have such a profound effect on us? Well, it's interesting that with functional imaging now, you can actually go into the brain and say, what happens at the moment of failure? Why does it hijack us so completely? So I'm going to show you some imaging now, and I know not everybody in the room is familiar with complex neuroimaging, so I'm going to take you through these images, and rest assured I'm going to show you the control brain first, and then what happens in our brain at the time of failure. Okay, control brain first. We have the rational decision maker in control. Moment of failure, failure monster completely takes over. Okay, pretty subtle stuff. Rational decision maker, failure monster. Okay, failure monster hijacks your amygdala. All right, your prefrontal cortex, the bit that frames things, that provides a bit of a cognitive lens to it, that has left the building. It's not even riding shotgun. This guy's at control. And the failure monster is like the worst partner you've ever broken up with, who wakes you at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, we need to talk about this more. And the things that the failure monster always says are, first of all, oh, who cares? It's just stupid. Second, it was probably someone else's fault. Then it'll go into the catastrophic. You are a catastrophic failure at everything. Everybody thinks so, and I think that you should quit. Okay, so this is not a super helpful narrative once we've got this monster in control. So how do we bring back the rational decision maker? So the first thing you do is do absolutely nothing, all right? Let the failure monster just run rampage around your house for a little bit. Eventually you'll get bored and leave. So do nothing. Step away from the keyboard. Do not let that catastrophic sort of discussion go into forwarding emails and getting on social media. So first of all, do nothing. The second thing is have a wallow. Acknowledge it. This is sad. This is disappointing. Doesn't need to be too long, but you do need to give yourself a little bit of a wallow. The third thing is you need to get some sleep. All right, it's like Rumpelstiltskin, weave straw into gold if you get sleep. So do whatever it takes. Okay, not Michael Jackson, not Propofol, but do whatever it takes to try and get a decent night's sleep and give your prefrontal cortex a chance to get back on top. Now you're in the position to analyse the mistake. There are 3 sorts of failures. There's simple failure, all right? You use salt instead of caster sugar in the cake. Okay, that's a catastrophic failure, but it's pretty simple. Label your canisters better, move on. There are complex mistakes. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, and this outcome happened. And lots of adverse outcomes in medicine are like that, right? Where a lot of things needed to go wrong for a bad thing to occur. That in one respect feels quite overwhelming. How do I fix all of those things? But actually you often only need to fix one of them. So it gives you lots of opportunities for improvement. But in research, we are mostly dealing with what we call intelligent failure. That is, you tested a hypothesis, it didn't work out. It's not as good as being right, that's for sure. But being wrong has brought information to the table that you otherwise would never have had. And I think about every failure, every job I didn't get, every hypothesis that never worked out, it's always brought valuable data to the table to take forward. You can work out, how can I improve on the basis of that and adjust course? Because as Winston Churchill said, success is simply going from failure to failure without losing enthusiasm. Okay, so just to summarise, taming the failure monster. Acknowledge this is failure. This hurts. It's disappointing. It's been a big waste of time. I'm disappointed with the outcome. Analyse the failure. Was it simple? Was it complex? Or was it intelligent failure? Accept the knowledge that is gained, adjust and move forward. Okay, what about imposter syndrome? So some of us spend a little bit of our life thinking, God, am I even good enough to have imposter syndrome? All right, so imposter syndrome, remember, is the first thing of doubting your abilities, particularly women, but also men. Many people who have got a lot of talent, but they spend their life wondering that they really don't feel very bright, they don't belong, they've fooled anybody who thinks otherwise. So that's the first part. And this is the second part, where you live in fear of being found out, all right, where you're worried about being exposed as a fraud. It results in self-doubt, anxiety, guilt, and the self-sabotaging behaviour, perfectionism, procrastination, pleasing everybody. These exhausting behaviours that we do so that no one will see that I don't really belong here. And I think about new doctors in our wards, and I think about new researchers in our lab. 1 week, 2, when you go in and say, hey, how's everything going? They're all saying, hey, everything's great. But probably for most of us, this narrative is going on in the background. So, is it a helpful construct, and how can we challenge it? If you haven't had a chance, I would suggest that you listen to this YouTube video and the QR codes there in case you want to pick it up. It's by Reshma Saujani, who's the founder of the organisation Girls Who Code. It's about getting women into STEM, but particularly into coding, which is a very male-dominated field. And she was doing a graduation speech, and she really asked the question, should we just be trying to disentangle this whole thing of imposter syndrome? Because first of all, are you anxious? It's okay to feel anxious. It's a new job. You haven't done this before. You want to impress people. You want to do your best. It's okay to feel anxious. But this whole feeling of unbelonging, perhaps we need to question the unbelonging bit. And is that about your individual inadequacy, or are there structural inequities? Do we have the age-old problems of sexism, ableism, racism, beauty bias, transphobia, homophobia that might be contributing to the sense of unbelonging. So it's okay to feel anxious. Of course, we all want to do our best. But this sense of unbelonging, Michelle Obama always asks us the question that instead of asking, why do I feel like an imposter? How could I and others not? Because everyone loses when bright people play small. So imposter syndrome, tackling the monster. Think about what is anxiety and stress that is normal. Unbelonging may be giving you a clue about where there are structural inequities. You belong. You belong here, you belong there, you are good enough. It's the job of all of us to fix the things that aren't. Okay, next, negotiation. When to say yes and how to say no. So someone comes in, they drop a big old monster on your table and they say, can you, will you, would you, could you? Okay, there are 3 possible outcomes from this, all right? I say yes, yes. Yes, I'll do it, and yes, I do it. This person's very happy. There's no, no. No, I can't do that, and no, I won't do that. And this person's a bit disappointed and they'll probably chuck you in the freezer for a little bit, but they'll probably get over it. The big risk is this, yes, no. I say I'll do it, I'm overcommitted, I don't do it. All right, and this is just frustrating for everybody. And this is where we need to be aware of the sloppy yes. Okay, so this is how a sloppy yes looks in my world. I'm running down to clinic, I'm quickly trying to sign off a grant contract on my phone, the patients are waiting, I'm running late, the Chief Medical Officer runs past me and says, do you mind just doing a quick high-level overview of the 28 adverse cases we've just submitted to Safer Care Victoria? And I've said yes to that request. All right, that is a sloppy yes. The next sloppy yes, oh, but you're amazing and no one could do it like you and it would be awesome. I'm very vulnerable to that, all right? So be careful about pleading and flattery. The next is there are just some people who are fundamentally very hard to say no to, all right? It's their superpower, all right? And you need to be wary of those people. You can see them a mile off. And then the worst one is the multi-choice, you know? It's like reviewing papers. Oh, God, I've said no 3 times to this editor. Maybe I better say yes this time. Okay, that is a sloppy yes as well. Okay. So, how do we avoid the sloppy yes? You need to say to people, how can you help me understand how I can help you? Because if you can get a well-formed ask, then you're in a position to give a well-considered response. And there'll be things that maybe you should say yes to. They are growth opportunities for you. It's got values and vision alignment for you. Sometimes the reality is that you are all going to be leaders, and sometimes the dark, icky, ugly stuff is the stuff you have to wade into because your leadership credibility is on the line. You say yes to those. You say yes to supporting others, to creating opportunities, to maybe starting a valuable collaboration. But sometimes even asking these questions, you just know the answer has got to be no. So how do you say no? Okay, there are some ways, sometimes you can just say no. No's a complete sentence. Do you want to unsubscribe? Yes. Do you want to tell us why? Absolutely not. I just don't want to hear from you anymore. Okay, so sometimes you can do that. Mostly it's not that easy. Most time you would like to help, but you just can't. In which case you need to give a really polite and genuine, I'm so sorry I can't do that. But remember, for example, I'm usually at a conference. Yesterday and today it's up in Brisbane. I knew I couldn't go because I knew I was going to be here. But I sent them a text yesterday, the organisers. I said, hey, chookers for the next couple of days. It's going to be great. Really wish I could be there. Very best of luck. It means a lot to people that you remembered. I couldn't go, but I know this is important for you. The next one is where there's a big power differential. Okay, this is a big old red flag, all right? When someone like me, who's been invited to do a review, I've left it on my back burner for 2 months, now it's due, I come to you and I say, I've got an opportunity for you. Okay, that is a dangerous situation to be in because you've got someone who's a bit powerful, you think, I don't want to say no to this person, but on the other hand, I'm not really sure that I want to say yes. So you don't have to say no to that person now. Your only job is to get out of the office without saying yes. All right, that's a really, really great opportunity. Thank you, I'm so flattered, blah, blah, blah. So good of you to ask me. I'm just going to go away and then you're going to take it to your no committee. Everybody needs a no committee. Ingrid's on mine. All right, you go to people and you go, what do you think? Do you think that's a good idea? They go, absolutely not. That is a complete and utter waste of time. They haven't given you enough EFT to do it and you should absolutely say no. Okay, and then you go back. I've thought about it. I'm so honoured that you thought about asking me. But I just don't feel that I can do this justice, all right? Very polite, very respectful, just say no. And always, if you can, offer an alternative or limitations. I've got a friend in business and he says to people, well, look, you can have it quick, you can have it good, you can have it cheap. And you choose two of the three. You can have it quick and good and it won't be cheap. You can have it good and cheap, but it won't be fast. You can see how you can then frame the limitations about, okay, will you prioritise what's important to you? And I'll see if I can accommodate that. Okay, so negotiation. Avoid the sloppy yes. A well-formed ask means that you can give a well-considered response. And think about it each time you're asked, when am I going to say yes? And finally, how am I going to say no? Okay, my last piece is an evaluation. I think evaluating behaviour and performance, whether it's ours or we're giving feedback to others, can be a sticky part of leadership that we sometimes shy away from. And if I have one bit of advice, and I haven't got it perfect yet either by any means, but that you need to side with the person, not with the problem. Not, this was a problem, what do you think about it? What are you going to do about it? Come round to their side of the table and say, hey, I don't know about you, but I don't feel like that worked out that well. If you had your time over again, how do you think that we could tackle or solve this problem differently? So in terms of evaluation, can I encourage you in whatever workplace you're in to have a feedback-rich environment? We know that the best organisations give 6 to 1 affirmative to corrective feedback. Now, you don't want to be disingenuous. Ingrid, I love your glasses, your earrings, your coat, your shoes, but you speak a bit fast. I don't mean that, but positive feedback is incredibly important in building your team and organisation, and you can freely spray that stuff around. Secondly, make sure, are you the right person to give the feedback? If you're the senior person and you saw the behaviour, you probably are. And you need to make sure that the time and the place balances timely feedback with giving enough time for everyone to have the space in which to receive it. Convey support. Be genuine. Sometimes my phrase is, hey, I've really benefited from feedback in my career and I'd like to pay that forward. I'm going to give you some feedback. Remember, there are 3 sorts of feedback, and you can give the driver's seat over to the person. Do you want to know what I appreciate about your work? Then there's corrective feedback. Do you want some coaching or advice? And then perhaps the secret sauce of all is, do you want to know where you stand? And if someone's brave enough to say, actually, I do want to know where I stand, then it takes you to a much deeper conversation that otherwise could be quite difficult to initiate. Build trust by letting them speak first. Everyone wants a chance to give their side of the story. Ensure feedback is targeted, specific, and actionable. If I'm just about to stand up and give a plenary, I'm going to finish for 20 minutes, do tell me. I can do something about that. If I've just dripped pumpkin soup all down my white top, I can't do anything about that, so don't tell me about it. There's no point I'm just about to step out. I can't fix that problem. So make sure it's actionable and start with the thing that is going to be easiest to action first. And finally, recap. Focus on the future. Be forward-looking. We're looking for this to build your career in the next step. And we want to balance in our leadership roles warmth and kindness with competence. No one really wants to hear from Mo. He's low in competence and in warmth. I don't really want feedback from Mr. Burns either. He's highly competent, but he's not very warm. I don't really want to hear from Homer, because he's a super nice guy, but he's pretty low in competence. Where you have a choice, be a Lisa. So in conclusion, taming the monster, side with the person, not with the problem. Remember, there's 3 sorts of feedback: affirming, advising, evaluating. And create a feedback culture, prioritising both competence and kindness. So fine is indeed a 4-letter word, but I hope what you're going to hear all of today sets you up for not just fine, but for a sustainable career, keeps you sane, and that you enjoy. And with that, I thank the Academy and encourage you all to connect, to inspire, to discover, and to grow. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful. And Sue just said I ran a bit late. Absolute rubbish. That was perfect. We just started 10 minutes late. So we have time for a few questions or comments. I hope you saw just how broad that was and a wonderful exercise in communication. Please, Sue, come over here.
Yeah.
Hello. So do you have any advice for handling setbacks in research wherein perhaps you'd have to restart a project or like redesign the experiment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's worth always knowing that you are going into science to discover something, all right? And someone who said to me, a scientist should never believe their own hypothesis. I think that's good, you know, because we always go in thinking this is going to be the answer. What I didn't tell you about is our first trial in South Africa. The first trial in South Africa, we used esomeprazole. We had very good biological data to suggest why it would work, and it was heartbreakingly negative. And I think that that moment where it just landed for us and we looked at it and we looked at the Kaplan-Meier curve and you just about could have superimposed the two damn things on top of each other. It is really heartbreaking, but we learnt from it. We said, you know what, these pregnant women are super sick with preeclampsia and I don't think the PK is working. So the next study we did, we said we're going to do a PK study first, make sure that we've got good coverage of drug before we take it into an implementation trial. And that was what made all the difference. So I think that there is an element, of course you're optimistic, of course you hope it's going to work, of course you hope you're going to get the Nobel Prize on the first crack. But the reality is I think everybody in this room knows that that just isn't how it works, that mostly it will be failure, regroup, remove. I think that that's when you really benefit from having senior people in the lab who have trodden this road before. And you all say, we're going to go out, it's failure drinks tonight. And we're going to talk about the experiment that failed, the thing that didn't work, but what we've learned from it and how we can take that forward.
Another question? I have one. Oh, there's one at the back there, so if you'd like to run up. But I'll ask you mine while we're waiting. So failure is resonating, and just to let you know, it never stops. And I have a big interview in about 10 days, which I'm doing from London. And last night I was telling Sue that I got the worst reviews, 2 expert reviewers. One was fine, one was like, nothing is good about this. So I'm at the wallow stage. I think I'm just getting better from that. But you know, how do you think failure makes you better as a clinician scientist? You sort of just gave a bit of an example, but at an emotional level, I guess.
Yeah, I think that I must say thinking about failure a little bit and really deconstructing it for me has enabled me to sometimes get up in the helicopter and say, okay, I can see what's happening with me emotionally at the moment. I can see that the amygdala has been completely hijacked by this sense of failure. And it is so crushing. And some reviewers are quite mean. Like I've just finished reviewing ideas grants and I've always tried to find what is the strength and what can I say that will be constructive in terms of feedback. But that's not universally so. And so I think being able to deconstruct what's happening to you emotionally. And I recently had an adverse clinical event actually, and it was just not super well handled, I have to say, by the organisation. Sometimes that happens as well, but it lands really badly. And I had someone say to me, a little bit cynically, but actually it did resonate with me. She said, look, this is just the mafia. All right, this isn't personal, it's just business. And we take it enormously personally because it matters so much to us. Our care for our patients, our dreams in research, they matter so much to us. But sometimes I think I do need to just not feel it quite so deeply and step away and say, you know what, it isn't personal, it's just business.
I find that really helpful, that concept.
Yeah.
Please.
I really liked what you said about offering to tell someone where they stand. I think I would really appreciate that. Just wondering if you're on the other end of that power dynamic, how can you go about seeking that feedback?
Yeah, great question. And I think that you can never say enough to people, hey, I'd really appreciate any feedback. And even if you sort of actually map it out for them, because I think sometimes your bosses don't think about feedback very well either. You know, if you've got anything about my work that you'd like to tell me is good, if there's some coaching or advice, I'm really open to that. But I'm also really open to you telling me where I stand. And if you open the door for them, then I think it makes it very much easier for them to say, look, compared to the other level 1 trainees or year 2 PhDs, I think the thing that you are under in is this bit. But they need to be able to do it in a way that they don't just say, I don't think you're as good as other year twos at your level. They need to think about the things that would improve things. You know, I've just done it with a postdoc of mine. I've said, look, your talk was very good. And then proceeded to give her about 20 items about how it could be better. And I think she was a bit crushed, and maybe I got the balance wrong. But I sort of circled back to her and I said, how do you feel about that? And I said, Mark's not senior enough yet, Ingrid and I possibly are. You know, I said, look, this is a precious time in your career. There will be a point at which you are too senior to give feedback. You know, and I worry about that for me. I think about things a lot, you know, and, you know, I watch myself sometimes giving talks. Oh, that's a bit annoying. You should change that. Because I know that once you get to a certain point, people just go, oh, good job. And then they never ask you back. Do you know what I mean? And I don't want that for my trainees. I want them to know that they will always know what I think is great about them. I believe in them, and I want to pay that feedback gift forward. But you're right, it's just a matter of the right time, the right place, and making sure that it lands in a way. And I think if the mentee is open to saying, hey, I'd be really open to getting that feedback, then it makes it a little bit easier for a mentor who otherwise might be a little bit conflict avoidant and think, oh, I don't want to upset them, I won't say that.
So I think what you're highlighting too is being self-critical, which we are. There's a saying, you're only as good as your last talk. And I always have that in my head, and I go, that wasn't good and that wasn't good. But also not too critical, otherwise you bring yourself down. So you have to get some measure of resilience. I think resilience is very important in this world, like my bad grant reviews, a bad talk. I think that's what you're hearing, a very clear message. I think are there any more questions just before I think we might stop there so we get time for morning tea. Can you join me in thanking Sue for a